The last customer of the night had paid his tab 20 minutes ago, leaving behind the ghost of his coffee and the scent of rain on his coat. Outside, the town of Havenwood slept under a blanket of mist, its secrets held close. Inside the Bluebird Diner, under the low hum of the refrigerators, Harper polished a secret of her own. It wasn't silver. It was blued steel, heavy and cold in her hands. A Colt Python, .357 Magnum, with a 6-inch barrel and checkered walnut grips worn smooth by a hand that was no longer hers. For 5 years, she'd been Harper Evans, the quiet waitress who knew exactly how the loggers took their coffee and when old Mrs. Gable needed a refill on her iced tea. She was a fixture, as reliable and unremarkable as the chipped Formica countertop she now leaned against. But in these silent, lonely hours, she was someone else. She was the keeper of this gun, a relic from a life she had buried under a mountain of pancakes and polite smiles. Her movements were a ritual, a practiced meditation. She broke the revolver down with an economy of motion that spoke of a deep, unsettling familiarity. The cylinder spun silently on its crane. The ejector rod slid home with a soft click. She used a specific oil, one that smelled of cloves and metal, wiping down each part until it gleamed under the diner's dim utility light. This wasn't about maintenance. It was about memory. It was about control. The gun was the last piece of a puzzle she could never solve, a promise she could never keep, and the one thing that kept the nightmares at bay. What the people of Havenwood didn't know was that their soft-spoken waitress could field strip a firearm in the dark in under 30 seconds. And what Harper didn't know was that her 5 years of peace were about to end. The bell above the door chimed, a sharp, alien sound in the dead of night. Harper's body reacted before her mind did. In a single fluid motion, the gun was reassembled and slipped beneath the counter, her hand resting on its grip. Her posture shifted from weary waitress to coiled spring. She turned, a neutral smile already fixed on her face, expecting to see Sheriff Brody on a late-night patrol. But it wasn't the sheriff. The man standing in the doorway seemed to suck the very air from the small diner. He was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored coat that probably cost more than her car. He wasn't from Havenwood. He was from a different world entirely, a world of sharp edges and quiet power. He looked to be around 40, with a face that was all angles and shadows, and eyes that were a startling, intelligent grey. They swept the diner once, not like a customer looking for a seat, but like a predator assessing its territory. They missed nothing, and when they finally landed on her, Harper felt a jolt, a cold shock of recognition that made no sense. She'd never seen him before in her life. "Sorry, we're closed," she said, her voice even, betraying none of the sudden thunder in her chest. The man stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. The bell chimed again, like a final warning. "The sign says you're open 24 hours. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that seemed to carry its own weight. She'd forgotten to flip the sign, a rookie mistake, a mistake born of 5 years of quiet. "My mistake. Kitchen's closed, but I can get you some coffee." "Coffee would be fine," he said, moving toward the counter. He didn't walk like a civilian. There was a precision to his stride, a balance and control that screamed military. He took a seat at the far end of the counter, the one that gave him a clear view of the door and the back exit. The one she would have chosen. Harper moved to the coffee pot, her senses on high alert. Her hand was inches from the Colt. She could feel its cold promise through the thin wood of the counter. She poured the coffee, her hand perfectly steady, and set the mug down in front of him. He didn't reach for it. He just watched her, his grey eyes analytical, searching. "You're a long way from home, Harper," he said. The name, her name, sounded like an accusation, but he hadn't used her real one. Not yet. "This is my home," she replied, her smile tightening. "Lived here for years." He finally picked up the mug, his fingers wrapping around it. He brought it to his nose but didn't drink. He inhaled slowly. "Smells good. Freshly ground." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "Smells like something else, too. Hops number 9, maybe. Or something a little more boutique. Cloves, perhaps." Ice water flooded Harper's veins. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew the smell of gun oil. He knew a specific, obscure kind. He was telling her, without a doubt, that he knew. Her carefully constructed world, the fragile peace she had built in this forgotten town, began to fracture. This wasn't a random traveler. He was here for her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice a little too sharp. The man gave a small, humorless smile. He took a sip of his coffee, then set the mug down with a soft click. "My name is Julian Croft," he said. "And I think you do." He slid a $100 bill across the counter. "For the coffee, and for your time. I'll be back tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss." He stood up and walked out of the diner as silently as he had entered. The bell chimed his departure, and Harper was left alone in the humming silence, the scent of rain and gun oil hanging in the air. Her hand trembled as she reached for the Colt python beneath the counter. For 5 years, it had been a symbol of her past. Tonight, for the first time, it felt like a prophecy of her future. The next morning, the Bluebird Diner was a symphony of familiar sounds. The sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the clatter of ceramic mugs, the low murmur of town gossip. Harper moved through it all on autopilot, her mind 1,000 miles away. Julian Croft's visit had shattered her composure. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every new face a potential enemy. Maggie, the diner's owner, and the closest thing Harper had to a mother, noticed immediately. She was a woman in her 60s with flour perpetually dusted on her apron and kindness etched into the lines around her eyes. "You're wound tighter than a $2 watch, honey," she said, placing a plate of toast in the service window. "Everything all right?" "Just didn't sleep well," Harper lied, forcing a smile. It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. Sheriff Brody ambled in at his usual time, settling into his regular booth. He was a big man, built like the lumber he used to haul before he took up the badge. He'd always had a sense about Harper, a quiet suspicion that he never pushed but never forgot. He saw her as a puzzle, one he was content to leave unsolved as long as she didn't cause trouble. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he rumbled as she poured his coffee. "Just a long night," she said, her gaze flickering toward the door. The ghost she'd seen wasn't from her past. It was the one that had just walked in. Julian Croft entered the diner as if he owned it, this time dressed in casual but expensive jeans and a dark Henley that stretched across a powerfully built chest. The morning crowd fell silent for a beat, the collective gaze of a small town sizing up an intruder. Croft ignored them, his eyes finding Harper instantly. He took the same seat at the counter as the night before. "I'll have the special," he said, his voice cutting through the resumed chatter. "And another cup of that coffee." Harper's hands were steady as she took his order, but her mind was racing. Who was he? How did he find her? How did he know about the gun? She spent the morning serving him, acutely aware of his gaze following her every move. He wasn't just eating breakfast. He was studying her, cataloguing her movements, her interactions, the way she instinctively scanned the room. He paid his bill and left without another word, but the threat of his presence lingered. That afternoon, during her break, Harper locked herself in the diner's small office and fired up the ancient desktop computer. She was no hacker, but she knew her way around the dark corners of the internet, another skill from her buried life. She ran a search on Julian Croft. The results were staggering. He wasn't just rich, he was a titan, a tech billionaire, CEO of a global logistics and security firm called Argent. There were articles about his philanthropy, his ruthless business tactics, and his reclusive nature. And then she found it, buried in a profile from a financial magazine, a single sentence about his background. A former officer in the US Navy, Croft served with distinction in the SEAL teams before founding Argent, a Navy SEAL. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The way he moved, the way he observed, the way he knew the scent of gun oil. He wasn't just a threat, he was a hunter of the highest caliber. And he was hunting her. That evening, as she was closing up, a news report playing on the small television behind the counter caught her attention. A national news anchor was talking about a cold case. New evidence has prompted federal investigators to reopen the investigation into the 2017 Union Station shooting, a case that left decorated DEA agent Michael Rourke dead, and his partner, rookie agent Lena Petrova, missing and presumed to be the prime suspect. A photo flashed on the screen. It was her, 5 years younger, her face hard and determined in an official agency photograph. Lena Petrova, her real name, a name she hadn't heard spoken in half a decade. The timing was impossible. Croft shows up, and suddenly the case that sent her into hiding is back in the headlines. Her legs felt weak. She sank onto a stool, her breath catching in her throat. The past wasn't just coming for her. It was being broadcast on national television. The bell on the door chimed. Julian Croft was back. He walked to the counter and sat down, his face grim. He didn't order anything. He just looked at her, his grey eyes filled with something that wasn't malice. It was urgency. "I saw the news," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "This is because of you." "It is," he admitted. "Things are moving faster than I anticipated. We need to talk. Now." "Talk about what? How you found a fugitive and planned to turn her in for a reward." "If I wanted to turn you in, Agent Petrova," he said, the name striking her like a physical blow, "you'd be in federal custody already. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here because of him." He slid a folded newspaper clipping across the counter. It was an obituary, 5 years old. The headline read, "DEA Agent Michael Rourke, hero laid to rest." "I know who he is," she snapped. "I was there." "And you've spent 5 years believing he died a hero, and you were the one who ran," Croft said, his voice low and intense. "You're wrong. About all of it." He leaned forward, his gaze boring into hers. "Michael didn't die that day, Lena. He was framed. And for the last 5 years, he's been rotting in a black site prison, disavowed by the very agency he served. I'm here to get him out. But to do that, I need your help." The world tilted on its axis. Mike, alive? Framed? It was impossible. She saw him go down. She saw the blood. She ran because their own people opened fire on them, because their handler screamed at her through her earpiece to grab the evidence and run. "You're lying," she breathed, the words tasting like ash. "Am I?" Croft countered. "I know you have the gun, Lena, the one from the shooting, a Colt Python with a custom trigger assembly and a hairline fracture in the firing pin. It leaves a unique mark on the casing, a ballistic signature as unique as a fingerprint. That gun is the only piece of evidence that can prove the bullets that killed the other agents at the scene didn't come from Mike's weapon. It's the only thing that can prove he was set up." He knew. He knew every specific detail of the weapon, hidden just inches from her hand. This wasn't a guess. This was intelligence. "How?" she whispered. "How do you know all this?" "Because Michael Rourke is my brother," Croft said, and the raw pain in his voice was undeniable. "My half-brother. We weren't close, but he's family. And I don't leave family behind." Her mind reeled. Mike, her partner, her friend, the man she thought she'd watched die, was Julian Croft's brother. And he was alive. The secret she had carried, the guilt that had defined her existence, was built on a lie. "The people who framed him," Croft continued, "are powerful. They're the ones who reopened the case. They're not looking for you to bring you to justice. They're looking for you to silence you, and to get that gun before it can ever be used as evidence. They know I'm looking for you, which means they're not far behind." A car's headlights swept across the diner's front windows. Sheriff Brody's patrol car. He was making his late-night rounds early. He slowed as he passed, his gaze lingering on the two figures inside the closed diner. Harper saw the suspicion harden on his face. He didn't stop, but he would be back. She was now caught between a past she didn't understand and a present that was closing in on her. "I need the gun, Lena," Croft said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "It's the only way." Trusting him felt like leaping off a cliff, but not trusting him felt like a death sentence, not just for her, but for the man she now knew was alive. She had to know the truth. "Not here," she said, her voice finding its old strength, the voice of Agent Petrova. "Tomorrow, midnight. The old Havenwood Mill, east of town. Come alone. You can tell me everything, and I'll decide if you get the gun." She was choosing the ground. She was taking back control. It was a risk, a monumental gamble with her life and her freedom. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't just running. She was fighting back. Croft nodded once, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I'll be there." The abandoned Havenwood Mill stood skeletal against the moonless sky, a place of rust and memories on the edge of town. Harper arrived an hour early, moving through the darkness like a wraith. She knew this place, had explored its every broken floorboard and shadowed corner during her long, sleepless nights. She was armed with the Colt Python, tucked securely in a holster at the small of her back, and a smaller, more modern Sig Sauer strapped to her ankle. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She watched from a high window as Julian Croft's car approached, exactly at midnight. He parked and got out, a lone figure in the oppressive silence. He was true to his word. He was alone. She let him enter the main floor of the mill, the cavernous space filled with the hulks of dead machinery, before she made her presence known. "You wanted to talk," she said, her voice echoing from the rafters above. "So talk." Croft didn't startle. He simply looked up into the darkness where her voice originated. "The man who framed Mike is named Marcus Thorne," he began, his voice calm and steady. "He was a deputy director at the DEA. He was running an off-the-books operation, using seized narcotics to fund illegal weapons deals. Mike stumbled onto it. The Union Station op wasn't a bust, it was a setup. Thorne planned to have you and Mike eliminated and blame you for the whole thing." Harper descended a rusted iron staircase, the Colt now in her hand, held loosely at her side. "Why leave a witness? Why let me run?" "Because you had the evidence," Croft said, turning to face her. "Not the drugs, the gun, the weapon Thorne used to kill the other agents before the shooting even started. He needed to get it back. He thought he could hunt you down in the chaos. He underestimated you." Everything he said aligned with the fragmented, terrifying memories of that day. The confusion, The betrayal, the sudden, overwhelming violence from a direction she never expected. "So you want the gun to clear your brother's name," she said, stepping onto the concrete floor, keeping a safe distance. "To clear both your names," he corrected. "Thorne is the one who reactivated the federal task force to find you. He's using the full weight of the government to hunt you down and bury the last piece of evidence. The gun is our only move." She looked at him, at the raw determination in his eyes, and for the first time she felt a sliver of belief. He wasn't lying. The weight of 5 years of guilt began to lift, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. She had been a pawn, a fugitive created to cover the tracks of a monster. "All right," she said, making her decision. She took a step forward, ready to hand over the gun, ready to join his fight. And then the world exploded in light. Dozens of high-powered floodlights ignited, bathing the mill in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The sharp crack of a megaphone split the night. "Lena Petrova, this is the Havenwood Sheriff's Department. You are under arrest. Drop your weapon now." Harper spun around, blinded. Figures were swarming the mill, deputies in tactical gear, their rifles trained on her. And at their head, his face a mask of grim duty, was Sheriff Brody. "Brody, no!" she yelled, her mind reeling. "It's a setup!" "I heard enough, Harper," Brody's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Or should I say, Petrova. I ran the plates on Mr. Croft's car, led me to a few interesting federal watch lists, and then I started digging into you. Found a sealed warrant out of D.C. for the murder of a federal agent." Croft moved to step in front of her. "Sheriff, you don't understand what's happening. I understand that I have a wanted fugitive holding a weapon, meeting with a man connected to a federal investigation," Brody shot back. "On my turf. It's over. Put the gun down." Slowly. It was a trap, but not Croft's. It was Brody's. He had seen them together at the diner, his suspicion finally boiling over. He had followed them. He had walked right into Thorne's plan without even knowing it. Harper looked at the Colt in her hand, the one piece of evidence that could save them. If she surrendered it to Brody, it would be entered into evidence, where Thorne's people could make it disappear forever. If she fought, she'd be gunned down. Her life in Havenwood, the 5 years of peace, was gone. Her name, her real name, was a curse once more. She saw Croft's face, a mask of fury and frustration. He was powerless to stop it. Slowly, her fingers uncurling, Harper lowered the Colt python to the dusty floor. She raised her empty hands into the air, the floodlights burning her eyes. Deputies swarmed forward, the cold, hard click of handcuffs echoing in the vast, empty mill. As they led her away, past a stone-faced Sheriff Brody and a helpless Julian Croft, her gaze fell on the gun lying alone on the floor. Her past had finally caught her, and in doing so, had stolen the only key to her future. She was a prisoner again, not just of the law, but of the lie she could no longer outrun. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Harper's wrists, a sensation she hadn't felt in 5 years. It was a grounding shock, pulling her from the blinding glare of the floodlights back into the sharp, cold reality of her situation. Deputies, faces grim and professional, patted her down, their movements impersonal and efficient. Her cig was removed from her ankle, her pockets emptied. She was Lena Petrova again, a federal fugitive, a ghost captured in the harsh light of judgment. Sheriff Brody walked toward her, his face a granite mask of duty. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her like a sentence. He looked at her, not with the familiar warmth of a small-town lawman seeing his regular waitress, but with the hard eyes of a cop looking at a killer. "I'm sorry, Harper," he said, his voice low and heavy with disappointment. "I truly am." "Don't be sorry, Sheriff. she replied, her own voice steady, devoid of the panic that clawed at her insides. She was an agent again, and an agent's mind was their best weapon. Be smart, he frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're a good cop, Brody. You see things. You saw something was off about me for years, and you were right. But you're seeing this wrong. She nodded toward the Colt python, lying on the dusty floor like a fallen king. That gun is the truth. When the feds get here, and they will be here fast, faster than they should be, they won't care about me. They will only care about that gun. Julian Croft, held at a distance by 2 deputies, spoke up, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. Sheriff, she's telling you the truth. You've walked into the middle of something far bigger than a fugitive warrant. Brody ignored him, his focus entirely on Harper. The warrant says you used that gun to kill a DEA agent. The warrant lies, Harper said, her gaze intense, compelling. I want you to do something for me, Sheriff. Not for Harper, the waitress, but for your own peace of mind. When they take that gun, I want you to look them in the eye and tell them you're logging it into your evidence records with a note about the hairline fracture in the firing pin. Brody's eyes narrowed slightly. It was a detail too specific, too technical for a simple denial. A fracture? It's almost microscopic, she continued, planting the seed. It leaves a unique tool mark on the brass of every spent casing, a signature. That signature will prove my partner was innocent. It's why they're really here. Just say the words, Sheriff. Hairline fracture. And watch their reaction. A good cop sees things. See them. The wail of distant sirens began to slice through the night, growing closer. The feds, as she predicted, they were already on their way. Brody's jaw tightened. He was a small-town sheriff, but he was no fool. He knew federal response times, and this was impossibly fast unless they were already waiting in the wings. The deputies pulled her toward a patrol car. As they passed Croft, his grey eyes met hers. They were filled not with pity, but with a promise. This isn't over. She was placed in the back of Brody's car, the wire cage a stark reminder of her lost freedom. Through the window, she watched as 2 black sedans screeched to a halt beside the mill. Men in dark suits and tactical vests emerged, moving with an arrogant authority that instantly set Brody's deputies on edge. The man in the lead, sharp-suited and radiating cold ambition, approached Brody and flashed a badge. "Agent Carlyle, FBI," he announced, his eyes immediately finding the Colt python. "We'll be taking custody of the fugitive and all related evidence." Harper watched Brody's face. She saw the conflict, the instinct of a man whose territory was being invaded. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then seemed to remember her words. "Of course, Agent," Brody said, his voice a slow, deliberate country drawl. "My deputy is bagging it now. Just need to finish my evidence log. Colt python. 3I-7. I'll be sure to note the distinguishing characteristics for the chain of custody report, specifically the hairline fracture on the firing pin." It was a masterful delivery. He said it as if it were routine procedure, a simple observation. But Harper, watching from the car, saw the flicker in Agent Carlyle's eyes, a momentary flash of alarm, quickly suppressed but undeniably there. He exchanged a look with one of his men, a glance that lasted a half-second too long. "That won't be necessary, Sheriff," Carlyle said, his tone a little too sharp. "Our labs will handle the full analysis." "My county, my crime scene, my report," Brody countered, his voice hardening. "Procedure's procedure." Carlyle's men took the gun and hustled Harper into one of their sedans. As they pulled away, leaving the mill and her 5 years of peace behind, she saw Sheriff Brody standing in the glare of the headlights, staring after them. The seed of doubt had been planted. In a world of lies, sometimes a single, inexplicable truth was all you needed to start a war. The next 48 hours were a blur of sterile interrogation rooms and transfers. They didn't take her to a federal holding facility. They took her to a discreet location, a black site masquerading as a government office building. It was Thorne's territory. They didn't want to prosecute her. They wanted to debrief her, to find out who else knew about the gun, and then make her disappear for good. But Julian Croft was not a man who sat idle. While Lena was being moved, his lawyers descended with the force of a hurricane, filing emergency injunctions, writs of habeas corpus, and demanding access to their client, Miss Harper Evans. They created a blizzard of legal paperwork that even Thorne's cronies couldn't ignore without drawing massive attention. Simultaneously, Croft unleashed the full, terrifying power of his company, Argent. He wasn't just a former SEAL, he was a master of information warfare. He tasked his best cyber forensics team with a single objective: find the ghost in the DEA's machine, Marcus Thorne. While Lena stonewalled her interrogators with the practiced calm of a trained agent, Croft's team began to pull on the threads. They started with the money. Thorne was meticulous, but he wasn't invisible. They found the shell corporations, the laundered funds from seized narcotics that were never recorded, the complex web of offshore accounts. A river of dark money flowed from the DEA's evidence lockers into Thorne's pockets, funding a life of luxury he could never afford on a director's salary. It was motive, but it wasn't proof of murder. Back in Havenwood, Sheriff Brody couldn't shake what he had seen. The speed of the federal response, Carlyle's reaction to the phrase hairline fracture, the whole situation stank. He was a man who believed in procedure, in the chain of command, but he also believed in his gut. He did something that could cost him his career. Before handing over the evidence, his deputy had taken high-resolution photographs of the cult python from every angle. And on a hunch, he had carefully bagged the single spent casing he'd found on the mill floor where Harper had dropped the gun in a reflexive safety check. He drove the 2 hours to the state crime lab, bypassing federal channels entirely. He called in a favor with a man he'd known for 30 years, a ballistics expert with a reputation for being incorruptible. "I need a private analysis, Tom," he'd said over the phone, "and I need you to look for something specific on the casing." Lena was in her third interrogation session when the door opened. It wasn't one of Thorne's men. It was a lawyer from Croft's firm, holding a court order that shone like a holy relic. The look of pure hatred on Agent Carlyle's face was a victory in itself. She was released into Croft's custody, pending a formal hearing. The legal battle had bought them time. Croft met her in the lobby. He looked tired but energized, a predator on the hunt. "Welcome back, Lena," he said, handing her a tablet. On the screen was a complex financial flowchart, a spiderweb of transactions that all led back to one man. "We have his motive," Croft said. "Now we need the weapon." "We're not going to get the gun back," Lena stated, her voice flat. "Thorne will have it swapped or destroyed by now. The official report will say the firing pin is pristine. Our only hope is Brody." As if on cue, Croft's phone buzzed. He listened for a moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Speaking of the devil," he said, handing the phone to Lena. "Petrova?" Sheriff Brody's voice was heavy on the other end of the line. "It's Lena," she said softly. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet," he grumbled. "My guy at the state lab just called. The ballistic signature on that casing you dropped is unique, just like you said. It's a 1 in a billion match. But it's just one casing. It doesn't prove anything without casings from the actual crime scene." "Yes, it does," Lena said, her mind racing, connecting the dots. The final piece of the puzzle, A memory she hadn't understood for 5 years suddenly clicked into place. Mike. Before the op, he was nervous. He told me he'd backed up his case files, everything he had on Thorne, and hid it somewhere safe. He said if anything happened, I needed to remember the first case, the one that made me. What does that mean? Croft asked as she relayed the information. His first case as lead agent, Lena explained, her eyes alight with discovery. It was a bust at a warehouse down by the old naval yard. He was so proud of it. He kept a souvenir from the raid in a shadow box in his office, a custom-made Colt Python he'd seized from a cartel gunsmith. It was a display piece, never fired. After he died, his personal effects were sent to storage. Croft was already typing on his own device. A DEA evidence storage locker in Quantico, Unit 734. We can get a warrant. No, Lena said, shaking her head. Thorne will have eyes on any official requests. We can't risk tipping him off that we know. We have to get it ourselves. That's breaking and entering into a federal facility, Croft pointed out, a glint of amusement in his eyes. I spent 5 years making pancakes, Julian, Lena replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I could use a little excitement. The DEA storage facility was a fortress of concrete and steel, but Lena wasn't a waitress anymore. She was an agent with an encyclopedic knowledge of federal security protocols, and she had a billionaire's tech resources at her back. Croft's team disabled the outer perimeter sensors and looped the security cameras. Lena, dressed in black tactical gear that felt like a second skin, moved through the facility's corridors like a phantom. She bypassed the magnetic locks and pressure plates with a practiced ease that left Croft, watching via her headcam, speechless. She found Unit 734. Inside, amidst boxes of old files and commendation plaques, was the shadow box, and inside the shadow box was the Colt Python. It was identical to the one she'd carried, right down to the walnut grips. It was Mike's original, the one Thorne had stolen and used to commit the murders at Union Station before planting it on the scene. The gun she had grabbed, the one now in federal custody, was the clean display model from Mike's office, swapped by Thorne in the chaos to frame her. But Mike had been smarter than Thorne gave him credit for. Tucked into the empty space in the shadow box where the gun should have been was a small, encrypted hard drive. Back at Croft's Secure Command Center, a repurposed floor in his Argent skyscraper, his tech team decrypted the drive. It contained everything. Mike's complete, unredacted case file against Thorne, including audio recordings of Thorne discussing the weapons deals, and the final, damning piece of evidence, a sworn, videotaped deposition from Mike himself, recorded the day before the Union Station shooting. On the video, a grim-faced Mike Rourke detailed Thorne's entire operation, ending with the words, "If you are watching this, it means Thorne has tried to silence me, and he has likely framed my partner, Lena Petrova. The proof is in the weapon. He's arrogant. He'll use my own gun against me." They had it all. The ballistics report from Brody proving the unique firing pin signature, the financial records from Croft's team proving the motive, and now the victim's own testimony from beyond the grave, pointing directly at his killer. Thorne is giving the keynote address at the annual DEA commendation ceremony in 2 days, Croft said, his face grim. It's a public event, full of press and the highest levels of law enforcement. He'll feel untouchable. Then that's where we'll do it, Lena said, her eyes hard as diamonds. He built his career on lies in front of his peers. It's only fitting that he'll be destroyed by the truth in the same place. The ballroom was opulent, filled with decorated agents, high-ranking officials from the DOJ, and a sea of journalists. On the dais, Deputy Director Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, a portrait of integrity and command. He was halfway through a speech about honor and sacrifice, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "It is our solemn duty," he declared, "to pursue justice without fear or favor, to cut out the corruption that threatens the very fabric of our society." At that moment, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the DEA seal, flickered and changed. An intricate web of financial transactions appeared, a river of money flowing from shell corporations directly into accounts owned by Thorne. The room fell silent, a confused murmur rippling through the crowd. Thorne faltered, his eyes widening in disbelief. "We seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties," he stammered. But his voice was drowned out by the sound of his own voice echoing through the ballroom's speakers, the audio recordings from Mike's hard drive. His deals, his threats, his greed, all laid bare. Then, the screens changed again. The face of the late decorated Agent Michael Rourke filled the screens, his eyes seemingly boring into Thorne from the grave. His videotaped deposition began to play. From the back of the ballroom, a side door opened. Lena Petrova walked in, flanked by Julian Croft and a stoic Sheriff Brody in his full dress uniform. They didn't run. They walked with a slow, deliberate pace down the center aisle, their footsteps the only sound in the cavernous, silent room. All eyes turned from the screens to them, then to the man on the stage, whose face had crumbled into a mask of pure terror. As Mike's video testimony reached its conclusion, naming Thorne as his killer, Lena, Croft, and Brody reached the foot of the stage. Brody held up a file. "The official ballistics report from the Havenwood Sheriff's Department and the State Crime Lab," he announced, his voice booming with authority, confirming the unique ballistic signature from the weapon Director Thorne used to murder 3 federal agents. Thorne was frozen, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. He looked from the video of his dead victim to the face of the woman he had framed, seeing not a fugitive, but an executioner of justice. Federal marshals who had been discreetly positioned in the room by allies Croft had contacted at the Justice Department moved toward the stage. Thorne's reign was over. His public image, his power, his freedom, all of it evaporated in a single, perfectly executed moment of truth. As they led him away in handcuffs, his eyes met Lena's. She didn't look at him with hatred or triumph. She looked at him with nothing at all. He had ceased to matter. 1 year later. The sun was warm on the Virginia countryside. At a long wooden table in the backyard of a sprawling, peaceful estate, 2 brothers sat across from each other. Michael Rourke, thinner and scarred but with a familiar light back in his eyes, laughed at something his half-brother, Julian Croft, had said. From the porch, Lena watched them. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, no gun concealed at her hip. After the hearing, she had been publicly exonerated, her name and rank restored. She had been offered her old job back, a hero's return. She had politely declined. The bell on the front gate chimed. A moment later, Sheriff Brody and Maggie from the diner walked onto the lawn, looking slightly overwhelmed by the size of the property. Lena had invited them, needing to connect the 2 halves of her life. "You clean up nice when you're not a fugitive," Brody rumbled, pulling her into a gruff hug. Maggie just held on to her, her eyes wet with tears. "I always knew there was more to you, honey. I'm just glad you found your way home." Later, as the sun began to set, Lena stood with Julian, watching Mike teach Maggie's visiting grandchildren how to skip stones on the pond. "Argent's new philanthropic division needs a director," Julian said casually. "Someone to oversee operations that find and help people who have been failed by the system, people who've been lost, forgotten, or buried. Requires a certain specialized skill set. Lena looked from the family she had lost and found again to the friends who represented the quiet life that had saved her soul. She thought of the Colt python, now sitting in a museum exhibit on famous federal cases, its story finally told. It had been a symbol of her past, a prophecy of her future, and ultimately, the key to her freedom. "I think I know someone perfect for the job," she said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She had spent 5 years as Harper Evans, the quiet waitress hiding from a lie. Now, she was just Lena, a woman who had finally learned that home wasn't a place you ran to, but something you built from the truth.